Okay, we are on to review number 3. Start with monopolies. We're getting into, this is after industry really boomed in the United States. Okay. Monopolies were big business leaders who did all they could to eliminate competition. Big businesses bought up smaller competing businesses until they dominated or controlled the entire industry. And big monopolies became trusts. Okay, monopolies are illegal now, but doesn't stop people from, big mergers and things like that, where they sometimes they get argued against that they could become a monopoly. All right, they're seen as a bad thing, and they are, especially for small business. Laissez-faire capitalism. Laissez-faire means hands off. Okay. And laissez-faire capitalism, they wanted the complete hands-off of the government on the economy. Okay? Didn't want the government involved in the economy. Government did not regulate big businesses for many years, but rather let the marketplace and supply and demand control industry. Entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs were people who were innovative, new and different thinkers. Okay, businessmen like Andrew Carnegie with steel, Cornelius Vanderbilt with the railroad, and John Rockefeller with Standard Oil helped skyrocket the American manufacturing to #1 in the world by 1900. You probably know some of those names, especially Vanderbilt and Rockefeller. Captains of industry and robber barons are two different names given to the same group. Okay, same entrepreneurs. Two different names depending on what they decided to do with all that money they were making. Okay? A captain of industry is a description given to entrepreneurs like Andrew Carnegie, who did great things for business and the country. Andrew Carnegie was a philanthropist. He gave away a lot of money to schools and libraries. A robber baron is a name given to entrepreneurs who get ahead by abusing the workers with bad working conditions, long hours, and little pay. I'll give you a minute on that one. Okay. Labor unions. Labor unions, like the Knights of Labor, led by Terence Powderly, and the American Federation of Labor, led by Samuel Gompers, fought for better working conditions and higher pay. For many years, the government supported big business instead of labor unions, and this continues today. I don't know how closely you follow the news, but there's things going through the Supreme Court right now having to do with labor unions. Okay. Collective bargaining. Labor unions wanted the right to collective bargaining. What that means is the labor, which are the workers, okay, and management sitting down and discussing terms in order to agree on a contract, okay, and then they're bound legally to follow that. The right to collective bargaining was not guaranteed until the Wagner Act during the Great Depression. Okay. 75 was the Sherman Antitrust Act, the Clayton Antitrust Act, and the Interstate Commerce Commission. These federal laws passed in order to restrict big business and help the American consumer. Before this, capitalism was controlled by, or business was controlled by supply and demand. When monopolies came into the picture, they knew that the consumer needed more protections. Okay? Populists. Populists were a third party prominent in national politics in the 1890s. They were made up of farmers and working class people. Populists wanted free coinage of silver instead of the gold standard. They thought it would set off inflation and help them be able to pay off their loans. Populists wanted government to regulate the railroads, a secret ballot, direct election of senators, and an 8-hour workday. The legacy of populists is that many of their proposed reforms were eventually made into law. Okay? The third party that actually got some stuff done. Third parties are, by definition, not very successful. Okay? William Jennings Bryan ran for president in 1896 against Republican William McKinley. He made a famous cross of gold speech arguing for the free coinage of silver so as not to crucify mankind on a cross of gold. Okay, so our currency was backed by gold standard. They wanted free coinage of silver, so they wanted to be able to mint. Muckrakers. Muckrakers were progressive writers who sought to uncover abuses of industrialization. Okay, you're going to hear about this. I know that there's always one question about this, okay, on the exam, especially Upton Sinclair. I think that was actually one of the thematic essays. Oh no, it might have been the DBQ last, what was that, June 2018. Upton Sinclair about the jungle. He wrote about the meatpacking industry and about what actually happened within there without any rules and regulations. You know, like rats in your food and somebody falling into a vat and just being made into sausage. Yeah, so Upton Sinclair is a big one. If you do not know Upton Sinclair, if this is not ringing any bells, look him up. Okay, you don't have to read the book if you don't want to, The Jungle, but it was about the meatpacking industry and it led to some reforms in oversight. Okay. Jacob Riis, Photos of Inner City and How the Other Half Lives. Lincoln Steffens, The Shame of the Cities. Ida Tarbell, expose on Standard Oil. And again, Upton Sinclair is probably the most famous one, The Jungle, about the meatpacking industry, because people were horrified with the stories he told. Progressive reformers like Jane Addams. She opened Hull House to help immigrants assimilate into U.S. culture. Okay? And Mother Jones worked to help labor. Progressive reformers. 80. Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. French, Du Bois. He is very famous. Remember his name, W.E.B. Du Bois. Booker T. Washington opened the Tuskegee Institute to help blacks get a job. He was labeled an accommodationist because he wanted blacks to get a job first and worry about equality later. And then again, W.E.B. Du Bois started the NAACP and wanted blacks to quickly achieve full equality. Du Bois. 81, women's rights. Suffrage is the right of all women to vote. Okay, so we had amendments passed that gave all male citizens the right to vote, right? And women were left out. Okay, so they wanted rights of all people. Okay, all women to vote. 1848 at the Seneca Falls Convention. Seneca Falls is actually in New York State, about an hour away-ish. Organized by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, the suffragettes signed the Declaration of Sentiments. Susan B. Anthony, who I've heard I am related to, but I do not know, was arrested for attempting to vote in Rochester, New York. We had a lot of stuff happen right here, right under our feet. And some states in the West gave women rights earlier than the East. Remember, states' rights. Federal is over state, but states are able to have their own constitutions and make their own laws. Okay, the 19th Amendment finally gave women the right to vote nationwide. Okay, that's federal, well, it became a law, but it's the amendment to the Constitution. Initiative, referendum, and recall. Initiative means that voters can suggest laws. A referendum is an idea, can go to voters of an area to decide, and then recall, voters can recall or remove someone from service. The answer is usually that these things gave more people the chance to participate in politics or increase democracy. If you see the words initiative, referendum, or recall, the answer is usually that it gave people the chance to participate in politics or helped increase democracy. Progressive amendments, you probably don't need to know this, but they're, well, maybe. They're good to know, okay? 16th was a graduated income tax, which means the more you made, the more you paid. 17th was direct election of senators, which is something that the party we were just speaking of was pushing for, right? Direct election of senators. 18th was prohibition. That was when they outlawed alcohol. And 19th, women have the right to vote. Okay, women's suffrage. Suffrage means right to vote. Doesn't mean they're suffering. Suffrage means right to vote. Here we go, progressive legislation, the Pure Food and Drug Act, the Meat Inspection Act, okay? Those two are directly related to Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. People, like I said, were horrified when they read, which I'm sure anybody would be, when they read that there were no regulations on the food that they were, being sold. And there were rats and bugs and sometimes humans in their food, and they wanted to know that that wasn't happening. So the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act are both directly related to that. And then the Federal Reserve Act divided the nation into Federal Reserve districts. So what that means is it created a Federal Reserve Board whose job it is to control money supply by raising and lowering interest rates. Low interest rates stimulate spending, and high interest rates make people not spend money, but makes more money for the banks, okay, or for the reserve. Imperialism. Imperialism is when a stronger country takes over a weaker country in order to get resources and markets. You probably heard about this in Global, okay? We go through it in, I believe it's Global 10. We go through imperialism of Africa. There was also India. It was, all over everywhere. Okay, so imperialism, like maybe you've heard the sun never sets on the Kingdom of England. That was because they had colonies everywhere. Okay, that was imperialism, going and taking over a weaker country to get their resources and their markets. U.S. imperialism. Okay, how are we involved? Commodore Matthew Perry opened up Japan for U.S. trade back in the 1850s. An open door policy. U.S. warned other nations not to carve up China into colonies so that we could continue to have trade rights there. And then Hawaii, after Sanford Dole and other American planters overthrew Queen, I hate this one, Liliuokalani. Forgot how to say that. Hawaii was annexed by the U.S. That right there, Hawaii, how we acquired Hawaii, was part of the June 2018 exam. So you probably want to take a look at that if you don't know. They probably won't ask it again right away, but it's good to know, okay? Hawaii was annexed by the U.S. Now it's a state. The Panama Canal. U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt helped Panama get its independence from Colombia, and the U.S. took the Panama Canal Zone in order to build a canal to connect the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean. All right, so what I did was I paused just for a second and I pulled up a map. Here we go. Okay, Pacific Ocean is over here. As you can see, this is the United States, there's Mexico, and there is South America, okay? Panama Canal bridged the Gulf of Mexico. There's the Caribbean over here, but this is the Gulf of Mexico. Whoop, there we go. Gulf of Mexico. Texas is along it. Louisiana. We had the Port of New Orleans. Up down into Florida, right? It linked the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. Otherwise, they would have had to, let me back up. If you're coming from the Atlantic Ocean, you need to go all the way around. You can either go two routes. You can go around South America or you can go around Africa, right? But what it did was it made this real quick cut through, so we had trade through the Gulf of Mexico and into the Pacific Ocean, okay? Or from the North Atlantic to the Pacific. It actually made a really quick route, well, relatively speaking, compared to today. So here is the Panama Canal. So it goes through Panama City, okay? And then they were able to go up and through and then right into the Gulf of Mexico, okay? Pretty cool. Definitely a good thing to have. if you're looking for trade. And we did. Okay, so we gave the canal back to Panama in 2000. All right. We're at about 15 minutes right now. I'm not going to do that. We're just going to keep going. The Roosevelt Corollary. Teddy Roosevelt added a corollary, which means an extra thing, to the Monroe Doctrine. It said that the U.S. would act as an international police power in the Western Hemisphere if any countries weren't behaving. The Spanish-American War. After the USS Maine was sunk in the Havana Harbor, the U.S. declared a war on Spain. Spain lost, and the U.S. got the Philippines, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Guam. The Platt Amendment, Cuba got its independence, but the U.S. would oversee its foreign relations, as well as keep a military base in Guantanamo Bay. Gitmo. Philippines did not get their independence until after World War II. Okay, you have heard of, we'll go into that later. Cuba. U.S.'s entry into World War I. Okay, starting to go into World War I now, around 19, I want to say 17, 15. Okay, we'll take a look. I'll make sure I have it for you. The Sussex Pledge. Germany said they would not sink American ships, but they repudiated or took it back and did so anyway. So there was unrestricted submarine warfare. The Zimmerman note you might have seen in class, found by Britain. It was a note from Germany to Mexico promising German help if Mexico wanted to keep the U.S. busy fighting over here. Okay, so we would be busy fighting on our own land instead of going against Germany. And Lusitania, many Americans were killed on board the Lusitania, British passenger liner, by a German U-boat. It was a British passenger liner, it had passengers on it, it was not a military boat, and a German submarine came after it and blew it up. Wilson said the U.S. needed to get involved in order to make the world safe for democracy. Okay, that was how we entered World War I. Schenck versus United States, we're going to go through Supreme Court cases later, but this is the time period, so that's in here anyway. Schenck was arrested for distributing anti-war pamphlets. He argued freedom of speech. His arrest was upheld because what he was saying posed a clear and present danger to the country. Okay, so they decided that it was against the law, it was not covered under freedom of speech, because it posed a clear and present danger to the country. Wilson's 14 points is very important, and we will finish here. Wilson's 14 points. Before World War I ended, Woodrow Wilson had an address to Congress in which he listed 14 main points he thought would keep peace with the world. The 14 points were an idea for a way the world should be after World War I, and Wilson's favorite idea was the League of Nations to be created in order to make World War I as the war to end all wars. And if you know anything about history, and I hope you do, obviously it was not the war to end all wars, and the League of Nations was very weak. Okay, so we're stopping here. We will continue with review number 4. Thank you very much.